Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Nichola Sweeney. The most terrible cases in the history of forensics are murders that are not motivated by anything at all. Nichola Sweeney was born 6 weeks premature in a hospital in the large city of Cork, Ireland, in October 1981. After her birth, both the baby and her mother were forced to spend 2 weeks in intensive care, but the doctors managed to save her life and avoid developmental problems associated with prematurity. Despite the accompanying challenges, the birth of a girl became a great joy for her parents. John and his wife, Josephine Sweeney, had wanted to have a child for a long time. However, they were haunted by failures, including 3 miscarriages that followed one after another. Young parents almost despaired, so the birth of their daughter became a real miracle, followed by a bright streak in their lives. 3 years after the birth of their daughter, the family was expecting another addition, a son named Sean. Finally, mother and father felt complete happiness. After all, this is what the ideal family looked like in the imagination of them. Meanwhile, the entire family moved to London due to the development of the parents' business. At that time, Nichola was 1 year old. For the next 15 years, Nichola and her parents regularly visited Ireland at least once a year to meet with loved ones. They continued to live in England because London offered more prospects and better earnings. Most often, they visited her grandparents in Ireland. It was there that Nichola developed a true love for nature. When visiting the countryside, she enjoyed interacting with animals, but most of all, she liked horses. It is not surprising that, against this background, she became a vegetarian. At a slightly older age, she began to work with horses in London. She loved to ride these majestic animals and attended the local church when she started going to primary school. There, she also developed a love for music and art. Nichola became a member of the church choir and participated in Irish dances at the local parish. Nichola was generally very proud of her roots and adored her native country of Ireland. Against this background, she constantly asked her parents to move back with her. However, her father and mother's business was actively developing, so they could not give up their favorite pursuit. Instead of moving back, they put the house in Ireland up for sale. It was a great family home, an almost century-old building located on a hillside overlooking the ocean, surrounded by greenery in a very picturesque area. At first, Nichola was upset, fearing that she would never see this place again. However, circumstances changed, and the parents' business began to gain momentum, providing enough funds for more frequent trips to Ireland. In addition, the mother and father did not want to lose touch with their homeland, so they refused to sell the property. At the age of 16, Nichola, along with her brother and parents, moved back for a while to that very house, which they had managed to save. This was necessary because, during this period, her mother and father had a third child, a boy named Christopher. They wanted to raise the baby in a calmer environment. In 1997, 16-year-old Nichola began attending a school located in the center of Cork. Due to the move, she had to change educational institutions again. However, she fit in well with new groups. A little later, Nichola met Sinéad O'Leary, who was very similar to her in many ways, even sharing the story of her parents moving to London. Sinéad's mother and father had also decided to return to Ireland. In 1998, just a year after Nichola's family moved back, the teenagers immediately became close. Their similar backgrounds and even appearances facilitated this bond. Both girls had a strong London accent, which made them stand out among the local teenagers. They were also quite shy, but Nichola supported Sinéad, who entered this school a year later and faced great difficulties communicating with her peers. The girl did not fit into the team easily, and Nichola understood her struggles. She accepted Sinéad as a kindred spirit. Their friendship began when Nichola suggested going to the cinema with a group of her friends during a break. The girls stepped outside to talk and ended up not returning for the rest of the film because they realized their similarities and became best friends. Nichola really valued this relationship. In the pages of her diary, Sinéad wrote that Nichola had become a second family where she could behave naturally and be herself. Sinéad had a tendency to take everything to heart, while her friend calmed her down. This was especially noticeable during exams. Sinéad was very worried, but next to Nichola, she felt calmer, as if she were with an older sister. Nichola evoked strong feelings in many who knew her well. She had an excellent relationship with her brother Sean. The teenagers supported each other, especially when their parents were forced to travel to London for work. Nichola usually stayed behind, as her parents took Christopher with them, believing he was too young to be left in Ireland under the care of teenagers. Most of the time, their mother babysat while working part-time as a waitress at a local cafe in the city's shopping centre. Sinéad attended another university and was frequently traveling to Dublin. Consequently, the girls began to see each other less often, but they maintained warm relations. Every time the friends were together, they simply talked and enjoyed each other's company, often spending the night and having fun. On the evening of Saturday, April 27, 2002, Sinéad visited her friend. It was an ordinary day for them, as the students planned to spend the weekend together, hanging out in the city with friends. When Nichola turned 20 years old, she returned home from her part-time job to prepare for an evening outing to the city center. Her colleagues said goodbye to her that evening, unaware that it would be the last time they would see her alive. Nichola left the cafe at 7 p.m., and her best friend was already waiting for her near the house where she was preparing dinner. They discussed their upcoming exams. Their parents were in London and were not planning to return for another week. As usual, their mother and father had taken their younger brother with them. Sean was still working at the hotel, where he served as an administrator. Before going home, he called his mother and spoke for about 10 minutes, promising to call again later that evening. After 8 p.m., all three of them, Nichola, Sinéad, and Sean, were at the family home having dinner. It seemed like an ordinary evening for the young people. Nothing foreshadowed the horrific events that would follow this gathering. Meanwhile, in a pub not far from the family home, three young men were unwinding: Barry Dolan, Cy McCarthy, and Peter Whelan. The latter was well known to law enforcement agencies due to his involvement in criminal activity. Peter was respected by no one, and everyone, friends included, feared his unpredictability. He had a criminal history, having been implicated in a robbery on Christmas Eve 2001. He had crashed a private party without an invitation, was thrown out, and returned to attack several attendees with a glass bottle, injuring a number of people, although fortunately, no one sustained serious injuries. All the victims lived near the Sweeney family, and while Nichola knew them, she did not associate with them. Additionally, their dangerous neighbor skillfully concealed his criminal dealings, so the heroine of the story generally viewed them with indifference. On that April evening, in the pub, the group of young men began to insult others present. Peter behaved threateningly, as if he were trying to provoke a fight. The bartender refused to serve him, hoping the group would leave the establishment. Peter pretended to agree, but it was a ruse. As soon as the bartender turned away, he jumped over the counter and grabbed a heavy ceramic ashtray. He intended to smash it on the bartender's head, but one of the patrons shouted in time. The man managed to dodge a direct blow, and the ashtray barely missed, causing only minor injuries to him. Following this, the police were called. Law enforcement officers checked the group of young people, who were all sober and showed no signs of injury. Peter and his companions were asked to leave. Frustrated, all three headed to Barry's house. However, his mother refused to let Peter and Cy stay overnight. Consequently, Peter decided to walk his girlfriend home. As they walked, she noticed how angry he was. He could barely contain his rage and walked a few steps ahead, fists clenched. Peter escorted his girlfriend home, but he still struggled to manage his anger. He felt humiliated for being thrown out of the bar and was unable to take revenge on the bartender. Additionally, the mother of his friend had refused to let him into the house, which insulted him further. In the end, filled with frustration, Peter headed home. However, he did not plan to stay there for long. Quietly, he took 2 kitchen knives. His mother was worried about why he was late. Peter insisted that he had been attacked at the bar, so he spent a lot of time talking to the police. After that, he silently left the house without telling anyone where he was going. He headed towards Sweeney's house, which was surrounded by a high fence, behind which was a garden. This did not stop Peter. He easily climbed over the fence and found himself in the courtyard. He walked along the driveway and tried to open the front door of the house. However, it was locked. Inside, two girls were having dinner. Nichola and Sinéad and her friend were planning to go downtown after dinner. They were watching a movie but then decided to start getting ready to meet friends. At the moment when Peter entered the house through the window, all three were distractedly discussing their plans for the evening, completely oblivious to the impending danger. Meanwhile, Sean had decided to attend the 40th birthday party of his best friend's mother, which was taking place on the other side of town. He asked a friend for a ride to the event, but he arrived too early. Sean offered his sister and her girlfriend a ride to the center, but they weren't ready yet and refused. Instead, Nichola had already arranged for transport and didn't want to let him down. At 10:30 p.m., before leaving, Sean called his mother again, but she couldn't answer because she was trying to put the capricious Christopher to bed. Because of this, the woman missed the opportunity to hear her daughter's voice for the last time in her life. Sean left, leaving the two girls in the house. Sinéad and Nichola were sitting on the bed in the bedroom, doing the final touches to their makeup. Nichola was facing the corridor while her friend sat closer to the door, but with her back to her. Unexpectedly, Nichola saw a dark figure appear on the stairs. The uninvited guest was silent, and Nichola couldn't understand who it was. She called out to the dark figure, thinking it was her brother Sean playing an unsuccessful joke, but the shadow didn't answer and began to move slowly toward the open door. When the stranger stepped into the light, Nichola realized it was Peter, her neighbor. He didn't immediately take out the knives but silently attacked Sinéad. He delivered the first blow, hitting her several times with his hands and feet. The girl was disoriented and fell to the floor, but the villain continued to beat her before pulling out one of the knives and continuing the assault with a deadly weapon. At this point, she was paralyzed with horror and simply begged Peter to stop. Additionally, he acted quickly, and Nichola barely had time to gather her thoughts to help her friend. But the criminal wasn't done. Sinéad suffered more than a dozen knife wounds while lying on the floor, desperately resisting. Peter stood over her, using his weight to prevent the girls from screaming or crying, while the attacker relentlessly struck blow after blow. Finally, distracted from his first victim, he looked at Nichola and took out a second knife, screaming as he rushed at her. At that moment, Nichola regained her senses. She ran in the hope of reaching the phone or getting outside to call for help. In her attempt to escape from the attacker, she received 11 stab wounds. The killer blocked her exit from the room, leaving her with only one escape path through the open window. Nichola, in despair, tried to get out. At that moment, Peter caught up with her, stabbing her in the heart before continuing the attack. Surprisingly, Sinéad was still alive despite the severe injuries. She was bleeding and slipping away from the attacker. This horrifying scene unfolded in pitch darkness. Later, the investigation revealed that, upon entering the house, the attacker had turned off all the lights he could until he was finally noticed while going down the stairs. Only the bedroom remained illuminated, covered in blood. The criminal again looked for his other victim but was unable to find her. He ultimately decided that she was already dead. Wandering around the second floor, he made ominous sounds, which Sinéad heard and prayed would not be directed toward her. Eventually, the criminal lost interest in his victims and left the house. As soon as she heard this, Sinéad mustered her courage and left the locked bathroom. First, she went to Nichola, who was lying next to the window in a pool of blood, having lost consciousness. Sinéad was very weak and could barely stand, but she managed to grab her mobile phone to call emergency services, then her father. She knew he would arrive at the house in a few minutes since he lived nearby. Unfortunately, 20-year-old Nichola died from her wounds in the arms of her friend just a couple of minutes later. Sinéad's father arrived immediately and supported his daughter while trying to provide first aid to both of them. Despite the efforts of the first responders, Nichola lost consciousness due to her injuries. Meanwhile, in the Sweeney house, police and medical teams were working hard. Peter returned to his home to see the result of his actions. Noticing the police and ambulance, he thought both girls were dead. After that, Peter ran to his uncle and pretended to be one of the concerned neighbors gathering near the house. Peter approached with the others and saw Sinéad being carried out on a stretcher. Sinéad was badly injured but alive. She gave a detailed description of her attacker, and the police interrogated her, fearing she could lose consciousness again or even die. This all happened around midnight. A patrolman recognized Peter, as he matched the description provided by the survivor. When the policeman approached him and voiced his suspicions, Peter immediately became aggressive, threatening the officer, claiming he was dangerous. It was decided to detain him for questioning at the station. According to Irish law, detectives are not allowed to deny a suspect sleep, so Peter Whelan had the opportunity to rest and also contemplate what had happened until morning. This gave him precious time to try to formulate a justification for his actions, but he failed to come up with a plausible lie. Eventually, he confessed to the attack, claiming that he was driven by voices in his head, blaming his actions on a long-standing mental illness. However, forensic experts were surprised to find nothing unusual in Peter's blood. There were no traces of alcohol or banned substance, which was confirmed by toxicological tests. Additionally, there were no documented cases of mental illness in his history, and he was not registered with any relevant clinic. Experts concluded that he was completely healthy. The question remained, what could have motivated a young man to attack two girls who had done nothing to him? Peter was charged with 2 counts of murder of Nichola and attempted murder of Sinéad, after which he was jailed pending the hearing. Detectives gathered all possible information to find a motive. Nichola was buried in County Kerry, near the place of her birth, which her mother always associated with the happiest moments of her life. Meanwhile, the doctors managed to pull Sinéad back from the brink, but her face was covered with scars from the attack. The road to her physical and mental recovery would be long. On October 31, 2002, a hearing was scheduled for the case of murder and attempted murder. The victim's family expected it to be a straightforward hearing, with the killer separated from others and the families placed in different areas of the courtroom, as is typical. However, the case drew such a large crowd that the courtroom was completely packed, with no free seats left, and some people were forced to stand. Families of both the victims and the accused sat shoulder to shoulder, creating a chaotic atmosphere. The trial commenced and was expected to be short since Peter Whelan had confessed. It was clear that he showed no remorse, even making cruel jokes about Nichola and Sinéad during the hearing. A major inconvenience for Nichola's family was the judge's decision to forbid them from reading their statements to the killer, denying them the opportunity to express their thoughts about the criminal. During a break, the seats of the victim's family were taken by the relatives of the defendant, and they had to move as there was no room for Nichola's brother. When the killer was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs, his father stood up and patted his son on the shoulder in a show of support, which appeared shockingly cynical to the families of Nichola and Sinéad. Ultimately, Peter Whelan was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attacking Sinéad, in addition to the life sentence for Nichola's murder. In his sentencing, the judge emphasized that this crime was one of the most brutal in the history of Ireland. What was particularly shocking was the complete absence of a motive. Peter claimed he acted out of uncontrollable anger for perceived slights and decided to punish 2 innocent girls who had done nothing to him. Just a month after starting his prison sentence, the case continued to draw national attention. Peter filed an appeal, but all his appeals were ultimately rejected. Throughout his imprisonment, he filed 9 appeals and even tried to reach the Supreme Court. Each of these events was accompanied by hearings, to which the family of Nichola and Sinéad were forced to attend. Peter seemed determined to force them to relive the circumstances of the attack again and again. They could not ignore these court summons because they did not want to give this monster even the slightest chance to achieve a mitigated sentence. Against the backdrop of Peter's impudent behavior, numerous questions arose about the legal system. Under Irish law, the appeal fee and the provision of a lawyer from the state are paid for by taxpayers. Hundreds of thousands of euros were spent on this. In fact, the victims of the attacker were paying for him to get a chance at freedom to continue his crimes. Naturally, many people thought this was unfair, especially the families of Nichola and Sinéad, who felt the imperfections of justice. Peter's defenders managed to achieve a change in the order of serving his sentences, meaning that he first had to serve 15 years for the attempted murder before the life sentence would begin. To the surprise of the Sweeney and O'Leary families, after 17 years of imprisonment, the criminal was eligible for temporary release. He was repeatedly taken from prison to Cork, where he spent his time quite legally. Moreover, the correctional system did not even warn the families of the victims that the most dangerous criminal was at large next to them. It became known that Sinéad was never able to fully rehabilitate herself after the attack. Even after 10 years, she still had an overwhelming fear of the dark and suffered from nightmares. To cope, she got a German Shepherd, which helped her feel at least a little calmer. The families of the victims repeatedly contacted the Irish correctional system, trying to get at least some comments about Peter, but all requests were ignored. It was believed that the temporary release was completely legal according to the parole board. Peter had almost completely served his 15-year sentence, although in fact, he completed only 11 years for attempted murder and received parole as a model prisoner, beginning his life sentence only 6 years later. Peter was first released in 2018 on compassionate grounds due to the death of his mother, Mary. He was granted temporary release to say goodbye to her. However, it seemed that the law enforcement system showed no compassion for the parents of Nichola or her friend, who miraculously survived the massacre. Subsequent temporary releases were based on recommendations from the parole board as part of the rehabilitation program for criminals of the Supreme Court, which is not mandated by law. These recommendations continue to cause controversy in Ireland. There are often cases when prisoners serving long sentences are given opportunities for release, but this happens extremely rarely in the early stages of life sentences. According to the Commission's comments, each case of temporary release is considered individually. In Peter's case, he was deemed a model prisoner. He initially spent 2 years in Cork prison, after which he was transferred to a maximum security correctional facility for 13 years. In 2018, he was transferred again, this time to a prison called Wakefield, which is considered to have a less severe regime. However, in 2019, the government confirmed that Rochestown murderer Peter Whelan would remain in custody until at least 2025 under the new Pardons Act. Under the Act, prisoners sentenced to life will be eligible to apply for parole after serving 12 years of their life sentence. This does not mean, of course, that they will be eligible for parole at that point. The department also confirmed that the Act will apply to both new and retroactive sentences. The new 12-year eligibility threshold will apply to prisoners sentenced to life regardless of whether the sentence was imposed before or after the Act came into force. The announcement was welcomed by the families of Whelan's victims. The Sweeney and O'Leary families are now calling on the minister to act quickly, so it can take effect before Whelan's next parole hearing, currently scheduled for November 2020. When Sinéad first learned that the killer had the right to temporary release and was periodically walking the streets of her hometown, she immediately declared that this monster would definitely kill again and therefore should not be released into society, even for a short time. She also stated that if he was released, she would be forced to leave her hometown because she simply wouldn't be able to feel safe. Now, they are trying to ensure that Peter remains behind bars and is unable to return to his hometown, where the families of Sinéad and Nichola live. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Nolan Buchanan. California is known for its beautiful natural attractions, particularly in El Dorado County, which borders Nevada and is close to the well-known Lake Tahoe. In this rural region lies the small town of Greenwood, home to over 1,000 residents. Tourism is one of the main economic sectors here. On the morning of Sunday, September 13, 2015, everything seemed normal until an urgent call to 911 reported a large fire in the forest area. Immediate action was necessary to prevent the fire from spreading. Firefighters quickly arrived at the scene and began extinguishing the fire, but the flames rapidly surged to heights of 33 feet. Fortunately, there was a stream nearby that helped extinguish most of the fire. The next step was to check the area to ensure that no one was injured and to assess the damage. During the survey, it was found that a small building measuring about 55 square meters had completely burned down, with only the foundation remaining. What caught the firefighters' attention was a strange smell that was later identified as the smell of burning flesh. Initially, the firefighters considered the possibility that a pet might have been trapped inside the house, but they quickly ruled this out when they found a human skull and a burnt rib cage. Sadly, it became clear that the fire had claimed someone's life. The grim discovery was promptly reported to the police, who faced a challenge. Parts of the house were still on fire, making it impossible to conduct a thorough examination. They had to wait until the fire was out and the temperature dropped. As the police stood outside observing the fire, they reached some preliminary conclusions. They determined that the house was clearly not the owner's official residence since it was situated in a remote and isolated area. Additionally, the house was very small, measuring less than 60 square meters, and it was likely a vacation home. Through their ongoing surveillance, the police suspected there might be more victims beyond the remains they had found, but they could not confirm this. To gather more insights, they decided to examine the nearby area. The total area associated with the house was 8 hectares and was owned by someone. On the property, they discovered a large trailer and an old pickup truck, which were registered to a company. They were able to check the license plates to identify the vehicle's owner, who might have been in the house during the fire. The search was quick, revealing that the truck and trailer belonged to a company called Buchanan Construction, owned by an individual named Adam Buchanan. Adam lived 250 kilometers, 155 miles, away, which is about a 3-hour drive. This information supported the police's suspicion that the house was merely a vacation retreat for those looking to escape the city. However, it remained to be determined who had been inside, Adam himself or someone else. Late on September 13th, 2 bodies were discovered in the burning building. The name of the company owner provided detectives with their first lead in the investigation. The police were tasked with checking on the well-being of all members of the Buchanan family to see if they were at home. They arrived at the family's residence and soon noticed a white Ford pickup truck in the driveway. A young man named Nolan Buchanan emerged from the house, surprised to see the uniformed officers, and asked about the reason for their visit. The police did not disclose the reason right away, wanting first to determine who else was home. Nolan announced that he was Adam's son from Adam's first marriage. He stated that his father, Adam, had gone to the country estate with his fiancée, Molly, and their 8-year-old son, Gavin, for a short vacation, and they planned to return that evening. The officers needed to identify the bodies found in the house, as they might belong to the Buchanan family members. Nolan stated that there should have been 3 people in the home, but only 2 bodies were found in the debris. To determine the identities, further examination was required, but the wreckage was still too hot for a thorough inspection. The next day, September 14th, the El Dorado County Police planned to speak with Nolan again to gather more information about the victims of the fire. The officers met with Adam's parents, who expressed their concern that their son, the owner of the burnt house, had not reached out to them. During their conversation, it became apparent that Adam, who had some experience with repairs, had been working on fixing the house. Although the building was connected to a generator, there was no electricity at the time of the incident. However, there were gas cylinders present, suggesting that the fire could have started accidentally or been set intentionally. Both possibilities remained open. Afterward, the police continued to search the forest area and gathered some evidence, though it was insufficient to advance the investigation. They could only access the ruins of the burnt house on September 15th. Investigators hoped that the objects discovered inside would provide crucial information for understanding the incident that occurred there. During the excavation process, they discovered a 3rd body, which attracted a lot of attention from the investigators because there was a round hole in one of the bones. This discovery suggested that something sinister had happened within the house. Accidental death was ruled out, and the possibility of murder became the primary focus. There was a strong belief that the fire had been set to destroy evidence of the crime. However, questions remained about how the incident occurred. Was it a botched burglary, or was a dangerous killer responsible for the deaths in that area? While the victims had not yet been identified, there was a strong likelihood that they were all members of the Buchanan family. To confirm this, the remains were sent to a forensic expert for an autopsy, with instructions to identify the bodies and determine their causes of death. It was discovered that one victim had been attacked in the torso, and another victim had a bullet fragment found in their vertebra. Unfortunately, the second body was too severely charred to yield much information, but the presence of cartridges nearby strongly suggested intentional murder. The remains of a third individual, identified as a skull fragment, confirmed that the person had died from a weapon attached to the head. The medical examiner revealed that the victim was a child. Detectives verified their suspicions about the identities of the deceased, confirming they were members of the Buchanan family, Adam, Gavin, and Molly McAfee. All three of them had been attacked. The police faced a difficult challenge in informing the victims' families about their tragic fate. The families had held on to hope until the end, struggling to accept the reality of their loss, and nothing could truly prepare them for the heartbreaking news. Upon learning what happened, the relatives were left devastated and grief-stricken. Neither Molly, known for her cheerful and friendly demeanor, nor Adam, who cherished his partner, had any enemies who would wish them harm. Although Adam had experienced a difficult marriage and raised his son Nolan from that relationship, this alone seemed unlikely to lead to murder. Marriages often have their ups and downs, and many couples find themselves separated or divorced. After parting ways with his first wife, Adam continued to care for their son, Nolan, hoping that Nolan would one day take over his construction business. After overcoming his emotional pain, Adam decided to seek a new relationship with Molly through a dating website. Their first date took place at a Starbucks coffee shop. They discovered they had much in common, including Molly's experience working in a construction company. It was love at first sight. Adam wasted no time in inviting Molly to move in with him, and she happily agreed. Their life together blossomed, and for 10 years, they enjoyed a deep and fulfilling partnership. Both of them dreamed of having a child. A few years after they met, Molly became pregnant and gave birth to Gavin, who became a half-brother to Nolan, Adam's eldest son. It seemed like a perfect family picture. However, family members noticed that their relationship was not as stable as it appeared. Adam and Molly often argued. Although Molly never filed for divorce, she would occasionally take their son and stay at her parents' house for a few days. It was also revealed that Adam and Molly liked to hunt near their country home. Since both owned weapons, investigators speculated that during one of their arguments, one of them might have grabbed a weapon, leading to a tragic outcome. The investigation raised concerns. If the tragedy stemmed from a conflict between the couple, there should have been a weapon found next to one of the bodies. The police carried out a thorough search of the scene to find the weapon involved in the incident. The possibility that the weapon had been badly damaged or almost completely destroyed in the fire was considered, but the search for it continued. If the weapon had been found, it would have supported the theory that Adam and Molly were involved. If not, it would suggest that an outsider may have harmed the family. Over 5 days, forensic team members methodically sifted through the ashes of the house. Their thorough search ultimately yielded no weapons, leading to the conclusion that Adam and Molly were not the perpetrators. It was also clear that 8-year-old Gavin was innocent, indicating that a fourth person was involved in the incident. The absence of a murder weapon was troubling, as it meant the investigation had to restart from square one, without any suspects or evidence. As is customary in such cases, detectives meticulously examined the family's history and relationships. While they had already interviewed Adam's parents, they had not yet spoken with his eldest son, Nolan. It was time to ask him some questions. The 16-year-old boy, Nolan, shared that after his parents divorced, he felt very anxious but tried to stay strong. He lived with his grandparents. When asked why he didn't go on vacation with his relatives, he explained that he felt it was his responsibility to take care of the house and garden while his father and stepmother were away. According to Nolan, they got into an old pickup truck and headed to Greenwood, the same truck that the police had seen near the burning building. Adam chose to use the service vehicle rather than his own because it was loaded with stones he planned to use for landscaping at his country home. The investigators asked Nolan if he was aware of any issues with his neighbors. He replied that someone was regularly growing banned substances on his family's remote property. This caught the detectives' attention, particularly because, in this part of the United States, violent crime is often associated with the cultivation of banned substances. The conversation with Nolan continued, shifting to the family business. He revealed that his father's business had been struggling lately. The company was facing significant challenges in the United States, with its employee count dwindling to just 5. Financially, the situation was critical, and the debts related to the business were quickly accumulating, according to what his father reported. Fortunately, the investigation had gathered valuable information, allowing the case to progress. On September 18, 2015, investigators began looking into a conflict that arose regarding the cultivation of illegal plants in that area. It was revealed that there was indeed a disagreement between Adam and his neighbors. He confronted them, demanding that they stop growing and harvesting the tree on his property, threatening to involve the police if they did not comply. Detectives believed that this ultimatum could potentially escalate into a desire to harm Adam's family. However, no one knew which neighbor was involved. To gather more details about the situation, the investigators decided to explore the neighborhood on foot. One of the investigators had a breakthrough when he met a man who admitted to arguing with Adam over the cultivation of an illegal crop. The argument was intense, but they managed to resolve their differences. However, Adam's business was facing a financial crisis. On September 17, police conducted a raid on Adam's company, confirming Nolan's claims about its dire situation. Debts exceeding $30,000 were putting it at risk of bankruptcy, leading to layoffs of some employees. It came to light that some of these former employees were very unhappy about being let go and might have motives related to the murder investigation. Investigators sought and obtained a warrant to access the company's premises and review its documents. The following day, September 19th, local high school students participated in a community cleanup just a mile away from Adam's construction company. During the cleanup process, a student discovered a small bag hidden behind a bush with a weapon next to it. The school management promptly informed the police, who examined the bag and found Adam's identification inside it. This led to a new theory: the victims were murdered, the weapon was found, and the killer may have taken Adam's documents in order to obstruct the investigation. The discovery was crucial, revealing that someone had traveled from Greenwood to confront the family before returning to Benicia, where they abandoned the bag and weapon. It was likely that the perpetrator was from the local area. Detectives were convinced that the culprit was one of the employees from Adam's construction company, as evidence was discovered just a mile away from the company's headquarters. The weapon and the items found in the bag were well preserved, so they were sent for examination. After obtaining a search warrant, investigators began examining the company's buildings, focusing particularly on financial records that could reveal the names of potential creditors. During the investigation, detectives discovered a surveillance camera at the company's premises, which was a welcome sign. The camera was aimed at the center of the parking lot. Knowing that the family had gone to the countryside on Friday, September 11th, the investigators decided to review the footage from that day to see if anything unusual occurred. In the video, they spotted a large trailer that had previously come to their attention near the family's burned home. The footage also showed Adam and Molly loading pallets of decorative rocks. However, a critical moment changed the course of the investigation. Although it initially seemed insignificant, the vehicle towing the trailer was not the old white pickup parked at the burnt house. It was a white Ford that had been seen in the driveway of the Buchanan home when investigators first questioned Nolan. He had falsely claimed that his relatives had left in the old pickup. With this revelation, the police became very interested in his story. Molly's mother, Susie Slankard, had a suspicion that something was off when she noticed a Ford parked near the burnt house, which was later replaced by an old car. Concerned, she called the police after a strange incident during a family dinner earlier that week. Nolan, who had been questioned about the country house, made an unusual remark, claiming he was no longer just an heir but now the owner. Although his father, Adam, had founded the company, Nolan insisted that the rights had transferred to him. Nolan explained how he planned to take control of the family business and sell its assets to prevent its downfall. It was surprising to hear such statements from someone so young, especially after losing his family. Susie, puzzled by Nolan's odd behavior, contacted the police to express her concerns. As a result, the police summoned Nolan for another interrogation. They did not charge him with any crime or demand explanations. They merely took his statement, in which he spoke vaguely about his whereabouts on the day of the murder. During the second questioning, Nolan provided more details. He claimed that he spent Saturday alone on September 12, 2015, attended church with his girlfriend and her family on Sunday morning. Later, he met friends at the shopping center and then returned to see his girlfriend. The investigators allowed him to continue without interruption but asked once how he had paid for his shopping and date expenses. Nolan said his father's bank card was at home and he used it. Following this, the police requested a search warrant for Adam's house, anticipating valuable evidence. They hoped to seize the bank card to review any transactions. The warrant was granted, and investigators rushed to Adam's house, where they found the card in the upper part of a safe. They also noticed a Ford parked in the driveway, which had dirt lodged in the wheels. It had just rained, and according to the police, the dirt on the wheels might have been washed away or at least significantly reduced. Additionally, a construction company's surveillance camera showed that Nolan had lied about the old pickup truck that the family was supposed to have left behind. The Ford was confiscated for further analysis, making Nolan the main suspect in the murder. Even though he was already under police scrutiny, gathering enough evidence to prove his involvement would be challenging, especially since he was a minor accused of murdering his family. The suspicions were confirmed when the investigation began with laboratory tests on the murder weapon, which revealed Nolan's fingerprints. This indicates that he possessed a weapon. However, further evidence is needed to prove that he went to the scene where his family was present. Detectives examined the bank transactions of Molly and Adam in the days leading up to the murder. A transaction took place on September 11th, just as the family was getting ready to go to their country house. A payment of $36 was made at a restaurant in a small town along the route to Greenwood. When investigators contacted the restaurant management, they confirmed that they had surveillance cameras. The timing of the transaction allowed detectives to establish when the family should have been at the restaurant. In the video footage, they identified the same white Ford towing a large trailer, which had been seen at the crime scene and had been searched and confiscated a few days earlier. Law enforcement officers discovered a receipt for a transaction on Friday, September 11, 2015, which raised questions about the details of the order. The receipt indicated that several sandwiches and 4 drinks had been purchased. Since the Buchanans were a group of 3, the question arose, why would they order 4 drinks? Investigators collected the bag and other trash found in the car to reconstruct the menu associated with the receipt. They also reviewed the trash discovered earlier in the investigation in front of the vacation home. Upon comparing their findings, investigators confirmed that the Ford pickup truck had indeed been in Greenwood. The next bank card transaction occurred on Saturday, September 12th, at a vending machine in a bar approximately a 30-minute drive from Greenwood. As in the first case, investigators visited the bar to review the surveillance footage. The video clearly showed Molly, as well as a woman nearby, withdrawing $40 from an ATM to cover expenses. It was clear that Molly and Adam were present, as their car was visible in the footage outside the bar. This was significant because it confirmed that Adam had his bank card with him that evening, and it remained with him throughout the weekend. After determining the time Molly and Adam left the bar, detectives tracked their route. A restaurant along the way had a camera facing the highway, making it a valuable resource. Investigators reviewed the footage and verified that the Ford truck was headed toward Greenwood around 2:30 a.m. It was widely accepted that Adam and Molly were in the vehicle. However, at 3:30, the same pickup truck was noted returning. Detectives became convinced that, at that moment, Nolan was in the car, driving home after committing the act of killing his family and disposing of their bodies. On September 13th, new transactions were reviewed, including purchases at McDonald's and gas stations. The records indicated that there was no food for 4 people in the paid order. It was noted that the Ford was still parked near the burned house and was driven by Nolan. The detectives checked with the bank and confirmed that only 1 card had been issued in Adam's name. It was clear that this card had been used between September 11th and 13th in Greenwood. With solid evidence in hand, the detectives returned to question Nolan, who was still in high school at that time. Nolan was called out of class for questioning. He said his father had left his bank card at home and had driven to a country house in an old pickup truck, not the Ford he was driving. Faced with the evidence, he fell silent, realizing that the police had caught on to him. After a tense silence, Nolan was officially arrested for the crime committed at the Greenwood house. In November 2015, Nolan was charged with the premeditated murder of his father, Adam, his stepmother, Molly, and his younger brother, Gavin. The defense quickly appealed to a juvenile court to have the case dismissed in Nolan's favor. The legal proceedings in adult court lasted 2 years, and in 2017, they received a response to their request. The ruling confirmed that Nolan would be tried as an adult, even though he had not yet turned 18 at the time of the crimes. The hearings were highly emotional as Nolan claimed he wasn't the killer. He insisted that his father was responsible and that he was merely defending himself. This shocking statement surprised not only the police but also the families of both Adam and Molly. Nolan said he was resting at their family's Greenwood home on September 12, while Gavin was sleeping in a bed nearby. They both suddenly woke to loud noises and screaming. At that moment, Nolan noticed a weapon aimed at Gavin, and then a shot was fired, killing his younger brother. In a state of panic, Nolan lunged for the weapon. Miraculously, he managed to push the attacker away, take control of the weapon, and attack the man twice. Only after the attack did he realize that the person he was confronting was his father. Understanding the gravity of the situation, he then poured gasoline from a car onto the house and set it ablaze to make it look like nothing had happened. He subsequently left Greenwood in the family's white Ford. However, this account was challenged by a forensic expert, who noted that a bullet impact found on a fragment of Gavin's skull indicated that a shot was fired at nearly a 90-degree angle. The prosecution concluded that Nolan, left alone at home while his parents were at a bar, waited for their return before killing both of them. Evidence suggests he killed Adam first, followed by Molly. Afterward, Nolan took his stepmother's bag and set the house on fire. On Sunday, he spent the day with his girlfriend to establish an alibi. However, the motive behind his actions remains unclear, as he has not confessed. Some speculated could be related to money. Perhaps he thought he could manage the family business better than his father. On July 13, 2018, after 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nolan Buchanan guilty of murdering Adam, Molly, and their son Gavin. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison but will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The Nolan Buchanan case is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many questions for the residents of Greenwood and the Adam and Molly families. The family had a seemingly peaceful vacation at a vacation home in the woods, but tragedy suddenly struck, taking the lives of Adam, Molly, and Gavin. Nolan, a 16-year-old boy, went from heir to murderer and was sentenced to 150 years in prison for premeditated murder. The true motive behind this brutal act remains a mystery known only to Nolan. However, he has chosen to keep it a secret, leaving behind loss and sorrow for those left behind. Thank you for following this story. Please share your thoughts and don't forget to check out the next episodes on our channel. See you again. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sandra Rozzo. Sandra Rozzo was a friendly and optimistic woman who always persevered. She lives in the town of Palace Park in Florida, USA, and aspires to build a career in the film and modeling industry. Anyone who has met her once realizes that she possesses all the qualities necessary to achieve this goal: an attractive appearance, a well-proportioned body, and charisma. Sandra began her modeling journey during her school years. She was actively involved in sports, particularly weightlifting, maintained her figure, and always dressed impeccably. During the day, she searched for modeling jobs, while at night, she worked as a bartender in a nightclub in Tampa, where she lived with her family. Sandra had always wanted to create a family and form meaningful relationships. Her attractive appearance draws the attention of many people, but finding the right partner is not easy. She set high standards, making it difficult for anyone to meet her expectations. At 37, she was divorced and living with her teenage daughter, Giovanna. She maintained a friendly relationship with her ex-husband and shared custody of their daughter. However, she is not willing to lower her standards in her search for happiness. Eventually, she met Timothy Alvin Tracy Humphrey, a tall and athletic man who stood nearly 190 centimeters tall. He claimed to have been a lingerie model and a professional football player. Among his friends, Timothy was known as an exceptional sports trainer. It was no surprise that he worked at a fitness center, where he was very popular with clients, particularly women who were drawn to his classes. Timothy was gentle and composed, capable of bringing joy to others and offering valuable advice to clients. Many girls who met him viewed him as the ideal man. Sandra felt the same way when they first encountered each other at the nightclub bar where she worked. At that time, Timothy worked at the club as a security guard in the evening and was very respected. Other men were shy around him, while women often approached him. He was cheerful and engaging and shared fascinating stories from his life. These tales suggested he had a diverse background, including experiences in the film and modeling industry, which piqued Sandra's interest. He claimed he was once supposed to be a stunt double for Vin Diesel, but circumstances led him to pursue a different path. Timothy had a talent for captivating his audience with his stories, which they listened to with interest and belief. Among these narratives was the intriguing claim that he had worked as Tom Cruise's bodyguard for a time. While the truth of this story remains uncertain, many people were eager to believe it. Sandra was much like Timothy in many ways. She was attractive, athletic, confident, and charismatic, which naturally drew people to her. Therefore, it's not surprising that Timothy felt a connection when he first met her. He approached Sandra at the Pinellas Park Club in November 2001, impressed by her looks. Initially, they chatted as friends, enjoying each other's company, and Timothy clearly noticed her above all others. As time passed, their friendship evolved into a romantic relationship, and they began dating. Their romance developed quickly over about 4 months. During this time, Timothy proudly boasted to his friends that he was dating a woman who loved intimacy and adventure, describing their relationship as very passionate. However, their idyllic situation didn't last. They began to experience disagreements and arguments, which Timothy attributed to a particular incident after one wild night at a nightclub. During a party, they were caught in a private moment by a police patrol while in Timothy's Mercedes. Timothy thought Sandra was upset about being seen without clothes, which made her angry. He found humor in the situation, but this only deepened the conflict between them. Although many viewed the incident as a simple misunderstanding, Sandra took it very seriously and was frustrated with Timothy. The disagreements led to a major argument that night. Despite feeling unhappy, they returned to Timothy's house with 2 other girls, and the party continued. At some point, likely due to alcohol and the carefree atmosphere, the girls' behavior annoyed Sandra. Feeling jealous, she asked them to leave. This marked the beginning of issues in her relationship with Timothy. By the end of the night, she decided she needed space to think, which possibly led to a breakup. A couple of days later, Timothy boasted that Sandra couldn't live without him. That's why they had the rough intimacy she initiated. He repeatedly shared stories about how much Sandra enjoyed being treated roughly during intimate moments. He believed that a little pain was acceptable in their relationship and considered it normal. However, not everyone thought their experiences were consensual. Sandra, who had visible bruises after the meeting, shared a different story with her family. She revealed that her boyfriend had set up the meeting and that she only now realized he had lured her into his apartment. Once they arrived, Timothy had already started drinking and became quite drunk. His true nature soon emerged. He became aggressive and started arguing with her. During this confrontation, he hit Sandra, leaving bruises under her eyes. It is clear that no woman should endure such treatment, especially one aspiring to a career in modeling and film, where mutual consent and respect are essential. While her family supported her, Timothy's friends and acquaintances sided with him. Sandra described the horrifying attack by her abusive boyfriend. His violence escalated beyond just hitting her. He tied her to the bed, abused her, and threatened to kill both her and her daughter. In this chaotic and terrifying situation, she felt completely lost. It took the Supreme Court a week to process and understand what she had endured. After much hesitation, she made the decision to report Timothy to the police. For Timothy, this arrest was entirely unexpected. During the arrest, he repeatedly asked what was happening, trying to comprehend the situation. At the police station, he explained his side of the story. He claimed there had been no argument with his girlfriend, they were just throwing a pillow. When he threw the pillow back, he said he swung too hard and accidentally knocked out Sandra's contact lenses, causing her to fall and hit her head. He refuted all allegations of threats or abuse. Sandra took the physical assault she reported very seriously. She provided a detailed account of the incident, and there was no indication of any playful behavior. Everything she described felt very grave and alarming. According to her, after the conflict began, Timothy shoved her onto the bed, sat on top of her, and pressed her head between his legs. He was stronger than she was and used ropes to tie her to the bed. When she screamed and resisted, he hit her several times, leaving bruises under her eyes. She was unable to resist and could not defend herself. Timothy had complete control over the situation. After the assault, he began to threaten her with violence, including the murder of her daughter, which deeply traumatized her. He likely feared being reported to the authorities, and rightfully so. Sandra accused Timothy of both assault and abuse, but unfortunately, it was too late for her to pursue justice. After a week of gathering the strength to approach the police, all physical evidence, such as DNA and bruises, had vanished. Despite this delay, the authorities were determined to respond. They decided to charge Timothy with assault, which could result in a maximum sentence of 10 years in prison. This possibility terrified him, leading him to confide in family and friends about his fears. He declared that he would end his life if he were detained. According to the police, it was during this time of desperation that Timothy devised a deceptive plan, hoping others would believe his troubles would simply vanish. Timothy was released on bail while awaiting trial for assault. Friends joked about his character, predicting that he would try to sleep with as many attractive women as possible before facing the consequences. However, by the fall of 2002, things took an unexpected turn. During this time, Timothy met a young girl named Ashley Laney, who had just graduated from high school. At 19, she fit Timothy's preferred type. She was not overly bold or flashy. He saw her as a quiet, somewhat shy person when they roller skated together. They discovered they shared similar musical tastes. Ashley worked with a friend at an ice cream shop right across from the gym where Timothy was a trainer. He soon realized that the girl he had casually encountered at the skate park was working just a short distance from him. Timothy later admitted that he visited Ashley's shop on purpose because he found her charming, attractive, and lively. However, the odd thing was that Ashley differed significantly from Timothy's usual preferences. Most of the girls he was used to were dancers or barmaids from the clubs where he worked part-time as security, or gym-goers who were bold and self-assured. Ashley was a bright girl with ambitions, studying hard and planning to attend college. However, her family life was far from perfect. She was shocked to discover that her father had spent most of his life in prison for various crimes, only to be briefly released before returning to jail for new offenses. Ashley lived with her mother, who struggled with alcoholism and often lashed out physically when under the influence. Additionally, her mother frequently brought home unsavory partners, which deeply affected her. Her friends believed these traumatic experiences contributed to her feelings of insecurity and vulnerability. Despite her challenges, Ashley longed to find a good partner. She was flattered by the attention of an older man named Timothy and quickly became close to him after he expressed interest. Within a month, they were living together. During this time, Ashley continued to work, selling ice cream alongside her best friend, Charlie Williams. Charlie soon noticed negative changes in Ashley's behavior and suspected that Timothy was having a harmful influence on her fragile state of mind. Ashley became increasingly withdrawn, avoiding those around her. It seemed as though a manipulator had taken control of her life. Despite this, Ashley felt content in her relationship and had no intention of changing it. In fact, she started to distance herself from her close friends and took a new job. Only 2 of her old friends remained in contact with her. One of them joined Timothy at the gym, and eventually, they decided to start their own personal training business for athletes. In public, Timothy acted like a man deeply in love with Ashley, constantly expressing his genuine feelings and serious intentions. However, Ashley's friend Charlie suspected that this was all a facade. She heard rumors about Timothy being unfaithful and noted that he did not make much of an effort to hide his flirtations. This led to persistent gossip about his involvement with various women at the bar. Charlie tried several times to discuss her concerns with Ashley, believing that the situation was unhealthy. Under the influence of a manipulator, Ashley could be putting herself in danger. Ashley ignored any evidence against her boyfriend, Timothy, and fully trusted him. Charlie thought Ashley was simply in love. Unfortunately, Charlie's attempts to help her were unsuccessful, and they began to drift apart, just as Ashley's relationships with others in her social circle did. By the spring of 2003, almost everyone had distanced themselves, leaving only Timothy. He told Ashley that he was facing a serious prison sentence. At the same time, he convinced Ashley that his ex-girlfriend, Sandra, was lying when she said she couldn't live without him. This manipulation gave him considerable power over Ashley. After that moment, Timothy decided to turn Ashley against Sandra. It wasn't difficult for him to do, especially given Ashley's sincere feelings and her reliance on him for support. The breakup with Timothy meant that Ashley would have to return to the trailer park to live with her mother, a prospect she dreaded more than anything. She wanted to avoid going back to the terrible past she had fought so hard to escape. In return, Timothy not only asked her to be his girlfriend but also offered her a business opportunity in which she would be an equal partner. This made Ashley financially and emotionally dependent on him. The manipulation didn't stop there. About a week before the trial for the attack, Timothy and Ashley got married. He later admitted to his friends that it was his idea. They held their wedding ceremony at the gym where they worked, with no witnesses or wedding rings, just a marriage certificate. Although it lacked romance, things worsened when they couldn't go on their honeymoon due to the circumstances. Then, just a day after their wedding on July 5, 2003, Sandra was attacked and killed while she was parking her car in the garage. She was attacked 8 times at close range, and forensic experts discovered numerous shell casings in the garage. When investigating Sandra's death, the police quickly realized that Timothy was her only potential enemy with a motive. He was not only accused of assault but also became the main suspect in her murder. The detectives faced one major challenge. Timothy had easily provided an alibi for the time of the attack. He claimed to have been at home eating pizza, an account confirmed by his friend and the delivery courier who personally handed the pizza to him. When investigators arrived at his home, they decided to speak with his new wife, Ashley, who was visibly nervous and appeared scared. She was under a lot of stress, so much so that she almost vomited twice during their conversation. Unfortunately, they didn't gather any significant information during this first meeting. However, afterwards, the police suspected that Ashley might be involved in the crime, and her anxious behavior led them to think she felt guilty. What's suspicious is that just a month before the murder, Ashley's car caught fire. She reported it as theft, but investigators suspected arson. This raised red flags, prompting them to investigate Ashley's background and activities. They discovered that she had purchased several paid computer programs for surveillance, one of which she used to monitor Sandra in real time, making her a suspect. The authorities also interviewed Ashley's mother's new boyfriend, David Abernathy. They found out that he owned several weapons. While a weapon he had previously owned was missing, he had lent another weapon to Ashley shortly before the attack. Furthermore, he still had ammunition for this weapon, which ballistics tests showed matched the shell casings found in Sandra's garage. More evidence supporting the suspicions continued to emerge. Ashley's mobile phone signal was detected near Sandra's house shortly before and after the murder, suggesting that she was present at the scene of the crime. With this evidence, the police arrested Ashley for first-degree murder. She maintained her innocence, claiming she didn't know Sandra, and requested a lawyer. Initially, she appeared confident and did not break under interrogation. However, after 3 weeks in jail, she confessed to attacking Sandra. Ashley revealed that her actions were driven by fear that her husband Timothy would be imprisoned. However, the investigation uncovered that the attack was not impulsive. It was the result of a detailed and planned murder scheme, which included multiple attempts. Before asking David for a weapon, Ashley had taken a small weapon from her mother's trailer. This weapon was simple enough for her to use with little experience, and she practiced handling it. She also experimented with different masks and techniques to conceal her identity. Ashley went to Meshkova dressed for the occasion and painted her face as part of her plan. A month before the murder, Ashley visited the Pinellas Park bar where Sandra worked. That day, she spent hours in her car watching Sandra's vehicle. When Sandra finally left the bar and got into her car, Ashley attacked her. The sound of the gun startled Sandra, leaving her confused and unaware of what had just occurred. She simply got into her car and drove off. If she had realized she was close to death, things might have turned out very differently. In a common mistake made by inexperienced killers, Ashley accidentally shot her own car's mirror because she misaligned her aim. After that, she set her car on fire outside the city and reported it stolen to the police. She then gave some wallpaper to her mother. Following the wedding festivities, a new stage of her conspiracy began. The day after her wedding, Ashley returned to the parking lot of the bar where Sandra worked. This time, armed with a weapon, she fell asleep and missed the moment Sandra got into her car. However, she noticed Sandra's black BMW leaving the lot and, determined not to fail again, followed Sandra's home. There, she attacked Sandra just as she parked in Sandra's garage and was still seated in her car. Timothy was suspected of being involved in a conspiracy, but he claimed to be completely shocked by the events. He insisted that he was unaware of any plan to attack Sandra. However, the detectives believed it resembled a contract killing, suggesting that Ashley had been manipulated into committing the crime rather than motivated by money. Timothy had a strong motive for the murder, which raised further questions. Interestingly, Florida law prevents one spouse from being compelled to testify against the other, providing a significant advantage for Timothy. Yet, this also heightened the detective's suspicion of his potential involvement in planning Sandra's murder. On the night of the murder, Ashley and Timothy made 22 phone calls to each other, leading investigators to suspect they were coordinating a violent plan. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, necessitating more information for a successful prosecution. As detectives dug deeper into Timothy's background, they discovered that his claims of a successful career were false. In reality, he had no modeling contracts and was a convicted felon with a criminal record that included theft and violent offenses against the wives of one of the undercover agents they employed. Controversy surrounded Sandra's murder, along with the rumors about it. Timothy hinted at key details multiple times and even threatened that if the client reported to the police, there would be serious repercussions. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, but he maintained his innocence. In February 2006, just before Timothy's trial began, the prosecutor took advantage of Ashley's vulnerability. They offered her a plea deal to testify against her husband, which would ensure she avoided the death penalty and possibly received a lighter sentence of around 25 years in prison. She accepted the deal, which became a crucial part of the prosecution's case against him. During the trial, the prosecution portrayed Timothy as a manipulative individual who coerced a young and vulnerable Ashley into committing a crime. She detailed the extent of Timothy's control over her life, explaining that she couldn't leave their home without his permission and had no freedom to make friends without his consent. Over time, his possessiveness escalated into emotional and physical abuse. He would hit her, regularly threaten to kick her out of the house, and on several occasions, he caused injuries that made her lose consciousness. Despite this, she feared losing him and didn't want to return to her mother's home, where she felt conditions were even worse. At one point, Ashley realized that the only way to keep Timothy was to eliminate Sandra. This idea didn't come out of nowhere. Her husband had mentioned it after she expressed her desire to get rid of Sandra. He even created a plan for the murder that involved disguises and a weapon. After a failed first attempt, he became furious and threatened Ashley, saying that if she didn't get rid of Sandra, the source of his frustration, he would send her back to her mother in the trailer park. Ashley felt she had no choice. Ashley arrived at Sandra's house at 11:22 p.m. She jumped out of the car and rushed to the garage. Inside, she smashed the car window with a weapon. When Sandra saw her, Sandra began screaming. Without any hesitation, she attacked Sandra multiple times. After confirming that Sandra was dead, she called her husband, Timothy, to inform him that everything was taken care of. He instructed her to dispose of the evidence and to contact him again afterward. Ashley complied. During the trial, she claimed that her motive for the murder was love and the fear of losing Timothy. Timothy maintained his innocence and portrayed Ashley as a manipulative person. He claimed that the idea to kill Sandra was Ashley's and that he had tried to dissuade her from going through with it. However, no one believed him since Sandra's murder clearly benefited him. He wanted to eliminate a witness to his prior attack so that no one could expose him. Timothy attempted to challenge the evidence against him, claiming he was completely opposed to any harm Ashley wanted to inflict but had agreed to help gather evidence against Sandra. He intended to use that evidence to coerce Sandra into not testifying, hoping that this would allow him to remain free. He explained that the phone calls made before and after the massacre were part of the romantic phase of their relationship, during which they communicated frequently when they were not together. However, this claim was contradicted by evidence showing that on other days, their phone activity was minimal, despite his supposed deep feelings. Furthermore, he continued to express his feelings for other women. He formed relationships with different girls both before and after his marriage. The jury deliberated for 4 hours before reaching a verdict, in which they found Timothy Alvin Tracy Humphrey guilty of first-degree murder. 2 days after the sentencing, he returned to the courtroom to hear the decision. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sandra's mother expressed satisfaction with the verdict, believing that it served justice and was a harsher punishment than that of the death penalty. Later, Timothy attempted to appeal the verdict but was unsuccessful. He is still incarcerated, and his wife, Ashley Laney, is also serving a sentence. On March 10, 2006, Ashley was sentenced to 25 years in prison as part of a plea deal with the prosecution. She will be 46 years old when she is eligible for release in 2028.